All right, we are back here. The NFL draft coming up this week here. Joining me today to help break down some of the top prospects in this draft class. Got to understand who's coming in the NFL this year. Great fan of the podcast. Bill Benner of the Sporting News is back. Bill, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on here. I want to start out here because obviously you're more tapped into college football than I am here. Like, what's your overall take on this draft class? Do you feel like this is a pretty solid overall group? Do you feel like last year was a deeper class? Like, how do you feel about the group as a whole?
Oh, I mean, it's going to be a good draft. I think, you have a little bit of something for everybody. Obviously, focus is on the quarterbacks, those first four quarterbacks. But, I mean, you saw at the Combine just freakish performances at just about every position, whether it was the tight ends or, an edge guy like Nolan Smith or some offensive linemen that can move and run and jump like never before. Not that they need to jump during games, but yeah, I really like this overall draft class. I think a little bit better than I did last year.
Well, that's definitely good to know people who are invested in this draft here. I want to talk about the quarterbacks here. Obviously, we have four at the top right now with Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson from Florida, and Will Levis out of Kentucky here. How do you feel about those four? You have like one you like better than the rest of them?
Yeah, I mean, those top four quarterbacks are nice. Stroud and Young, I think that depending on what mock you look at, I mean, there's some that have Bryce number one. There's others that have CJ. I can see the case for both. I think Bryce Young's just incredible playmaking skill set was on display in college. I'm maybe not as worried about size as some other people might be. CJ Stroud, super accurate, had a great combine, good 2-year track record, and topped it off with a very big game against Georgia. And then the other two, Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, I think it somewhat depends on landing spot because there will be some patience required. Anthony Richardson, probably the best athlete that we've seen at the Combine at quarterback position in a while. And then Will Levis with that arm strength, talent, good intangibles. You hear that a lot with quarterbacks, but I just know from people I've talked to in that Kentucky program that how much he meant to the city of Lexington in those 2 years. And that can carry over when you're the face of a city and an NFL franchise.
Yeah, for sure here. I know you talk about Bryce Young's height. There's some rumors flowing around that the Panthers may not take him because of the height, and if Frank Reich historically is valued taller quarterback may put them more in the mix for C.J. Stroud. You said you feel that the height's not a big disqualifier for you. Why do you feel that way about Bryce Young?
Just because he can make plays, and there's more 6'1" type quarterbacks than ever. I mean, I really think the Russell Wilson comparison is apt. The way that he can extend plays with his legs, his vision, the way he kind of distributes the football like a point guard. And, sometimes I don't overcomplicate it. I've covered college football. That's my beat. And when you want to see the best players in college football, when you're talking about that the last 2 years, it's hard to say that Bryce Young wasn't that guy when he was healthy. He won a Heisman Trophy. He won that Texas game. When he was healthy toward the end of the season, there was a reason why Alabama was talking like they should have been in the playoffs. So, yeah, he's a phenomenal player. I think he'll be fine at the next level.
Yeah, and speaking of a player who could be really good at the next level, has an off-the-field question right now. It's Georgia star Jalen Carter. I mean, prior to the playoff, it's supposed to always be the top pick in the draft when the Bears held the pick. Obviously, we know what happened with the off-field incident where he got charged with reckless driving for being in the drag race that killed one of his teammates and a staffer at Georgia here. Like, if the off-the-field stuff checks out here, do you think that Carter's still be a very good NFL player? Because to me, this sort of feels like what happened to a much more serious degree than what happened with Larry Tunsil a few years back when the video circulated him with the gas mask doing marijuana. I feel like he's a guy might fall, ends up getting something a very good player at a value price.
Well, the combine wasn't great. The timing obviously wasn't great, and those questions are going to hang around Jalen Carter. I mean, there's nothing I can say that is going to change how that might go. I can't say that on the field, there's these questions about. The last thing I read was, does he play hard every snap? And there are a lot of smoke screens. I mean, obviously, a super talented player on a Georgia defense that had a lot of super talented players, and that's always hard to gauge. I mean, if I was wrong about anything last year, you watch guys like Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker, and you're not quite sure which one of those guys will pop, and it ends up probably being Travon Walker, right? He went straight to Jacksonville and had that monster season, even though at Georgia, he probably didn't have the numbers of those other guys.
Yeah, that's certainly true here. Another guy I feel is interesting at the top of the draft here is the edge rusher, Will Anderson, because right now it's like he's the consensus of, if Arizona stays at 3, he's their guy, whereas the other option would be, trade back and take advantage of the team looking for a quarterback here. If Arizona does take it, what are they getting in Will Anderson?
Complete pass rusher, dominant. Don't overthink it with him, because you look at the 3-year track record. I mean, he checks out in terms of being able to disrupt the running game, athletic enough to guard against the pass, just a dominant pass rusher off the edge. That the comparison that's being made is DeMarcus Ware, the former Troy and then Dallas Cowboys and Broncos edge rusher, who had 138 sacks at the next level. So if you're getting DeMarcus Ware, you should take him. And I think Will Anderson will have a great career in the NFL. I think, from a leadership standpoint, there's another guy with a lot of intangibles on top of everything else. And I think he's a safer pick than the quarterback. And granted, teams are going to take quarterbacks over an edge rusher anyway, but out of those top 5 picks, I think he's probably the safest guy.
Yeah, that's for sure. You're speaking of a guy who's, I feel like, one of the most exciting potentials in the draft here is Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas here. Obviously, his measurables off the charts. He's an explosive player at Texas in his college career, but this is the NFL where they don't really value running backs highly anymore. A lot of them don't go very high in the first round here. I feel like Robinson should be an exception in this category. You feel like he could be a guy who could climb as high as the top 10?
Yeah, he's definitely first-round material. The thing with Bijan that I'm wondering is, you're obviously dealing with a guy that averaged over 6 yards a carry. He had over 20 catches per season at Texas. He put on a show at the Combine. He looks like the most complete running back in this class, and I do believe he's that. But are you paying for somebody that is in the Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey type? Those guys were first-round picks that have cleared over 4,000 yards rushing for their career in a short amount of time. Can Bijan Robinson do that more than 1 year? And I think that's what teams are weighing. What's going to probably end up happening is that he's a back half of the first-round pick and perhaps even a luxury pick. I mean, there's so many good fits. I mean, he created Philly or Buffalo or Cincy or Dallas or Detroit was a mock that we've seen him in. I mean, all of those teams, if they can go get a Bijan Robinson and see what he does for their running game, it would be a great thing.
Yeah, because Philly jumped out because they have the 2 first-round picks here, and I was thinking even as high as number 10 because I know they had you take like a defensive player, they could take a lineman here, but like they just lost Miles Sanders. A guy like Bijan Robinson, that Philly offense could be very scary. Yeah,
I mean he can put teams over the top, and I like the Cowboys fit in particular, and because they got rid of Zeke, and then if you go and do that kind of what they did with Darren McFadden and Felix Jones a few years ago, where you get both of those guys, you form an unstoppable running attack. I know Dallas could probably also go offensive line here, but every once in a while Jerry Jones likes to make a splash pick, and he would be that. And again, he would fit in Cincinnati, he would fit in Buffalo. I mean, he could play on a team and be like that X factor player, at least in the short term, that could make the difference in a potential Super Bowl run.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And you mentioned the offensive line here as well. And like, I'm a Jet fan. I know that they're going to be looking for offensive linemen, assuming they can get this Aaron Rodgers trade done anytime before the season starts here. But there are a couple of guys in that top 10, 15 area here, whether it's Peter Skoronski, whether it's Paris Johnson, whether it's Broderick Jones. There's a whole bunch of guys here. How do you view these top tackles?
Well, Skoronski and Paris Johnson, again, they fall under the classification of a safe pick. Very, very good athletes. They only allowed 3 sacks the last 2 seasons. I think you get value in him because you could slide him down to guard, and he'd be fine there too. I don't like the Rashawn Slater comparison because they're different players, but I mean, just because they went to the same school doesn't mean they're the same guy. But both very effective. Paris Johnson, DeJuan Jones, both Ohio State tackles. Very clean players, very athletic players, very big. DeWand in particular, who may fall a little behind Paris, was, just amazing to watch him move the way that he did at the Combine.
Yeah, that's for sure here. A lot of the positions that always gets most attention from fans, right, is receivers, because we've seen rookie receivers come to the league last year make big plays. We know last year that Ohio State alone produced two guys who were in the mix for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. There have been rumblings that this wide receiver class is not as strong as last year's was, even the year before that. Like, do you feel that way? Or you think there's value to be had at receiver?
Oh, I like all three of the first-round guys. I think Quentin Johnston, he's raw. He may take a minute to click, but you saw how he could take over a game like he did against Michigan in the college football playoff. Jordan Addison was a steady, awesome player for 2 years at USC and Pitt. I will say I like Jackson Smith and Jigba more than both of them. I think he's the best route runner in this draft. I know he missed the hamstring injury. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were in school. They were raving about how JSN is going to do better things than them, and both of those guys just had 1,000 yards in the NFL. So I think I'm going to trust that Ohio State pipeline. I think you just watch his route running and hearing actual NFL receivers like Steve Smith rave about it. That was kind of Steve Smith's thing too. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be an immediate impact player. He's the best receiver in this draft.
Yeah, definitely interesting, because I remember you talking about Jackson being last year when you were talking about Wilson and Olave, and you said he's the best of those three guys, and if he's better than what Wilson and Olave were, so I think you get a real steal there.
Oh, for sure. And whether it's a Green Bay or, even the Jets, teams that are looking to pile on and add a guy that can just be a total mismatch in the slot, he's definitely that guy. So I think JSN, in my opinion, can be that. There's some other guys too, but of those three, I like them. There's also some value guys. Zay Flowers, that gained 10, 15 pounds. The more people I talk to about him, they love him. And Josh Downs in North Carolina, another filthy route runner. Maybe those two don't cost as much as the top three receivers, but I think if it comes down to landing spot, those two could have immediate impact based on what they did in the ACC last season.
Yeah, for sure. I also feel like if you're looking for a cornerback this year, this is the year to do it, because I've seen lots of big time corners on draft boards, whether it's Christian Gonzalez, Joey Porter Jr., name a few here. How deep is this corner crop?
Y'all very good, very good. And Gonzalez really improved his stocks with how he ran combine. DJ Turner also ran very well. I didn't know how good DJ Turner was, and then you start to appreciate him a little more after you see how he ran. Joey Porter, a good example. Devin Witherspoon's a guy that's across the board. We didn't leave him. He didn't make our All-American team, and I'm still hearing about it. But he's a very good player. Emmanuel Forbes, I like him. He's kind of the sleeper I like. Long, productive, played in the SEC. I always, whether it's right or wrong, I always give an SEC corner a little bit more of a bump because the competition they're seeing every week.
Yeah, I know it's definitely a spot the Giants will be looking at too, down at 26. They're still trying to replace James Bradbury from last year. This is a really good spot to be in to get. You can still get a good corner down there.
Oh, for sure. And I think Banks is another one. The Maryland corners had a great combine. So yeah, there's definitely depth at that position, just like receiver, because it's obviously become a passing game, and those guys all definitely fit that description.
Absolutely. Let's look at some of the tight ends here. Usually tight ends don't get into the first round unless you have a couple guys who could be in the mix here, including Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame and Dalton Kincaid from Utah could be in there. How do you like the tight end group?
Very deep. Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid, Musgrave, Darnell Washington. These are mismatches, and that's kind of the name of the game. When you see Darnell Washington do some of the things he did at the Combine, you just shake your head because he's so big, and he looks like a Marvel comic guy. I don't watch a lot of those Marvel comic movies, but he looks like somebody you would see in a Marvel comic movie. Very phenomenal athlete. Mayer is the classic inline, 700 yards, averaged about 70 catches a year. Didn't wow at the Combine, but to me, didn't have to because I've seen it on the field. Dalton Kincaid, same deal. He had a higher catch percentage than Michael Mayer. So I think those two are definite first-rounders, Washington, Musgrave, and even behind those guys, there's a couple more that you could possibly grab.
Yeah, that's for sure here. In terms of overall positions here, which position do you feel like has the most depth? Is it the corners or somewhere else?
Corner's pretty tight this year. I mean, there's a lot, and I did like this group of receivers. Like I mentioned, a lot of those guys. But the way that went at the combine, and again, just mention Downs and Flowers again. They're when you can get a guy like them on the second day, there's pretty good depth there. That corner class had a lot of corners that could run. I mean, we haven't even talked about Akeli Ringo, who had the numbers that he had at Georgia and had the career that he had. Got picked on a little bit in the playoff game, the first one. He was also guarding Marvin Harrison, who's a guy that could come next year.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's go the other way here. What do you think is the least depth position? I feel like we haven't talked about linebackers at all. I feel like there's not a ton of impact linebackers right away outside of the edge rushers.
Right, and part of that is Jack Campbell's probably the best inside linebacker you have, and he could fall to the second round. So when you have that kind of player in the second round, I love Jack Campbell. I love his max effort. He reminds me a little bit of Logan Wilson for the Bengals, where, in the right scheme, he could pile up the tackles, but there's not a ton of inside guys. Edge rusher, there are some elite ones, and they're always going to be, but then where does it go from there? I mean, after Miles Murphy and Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, where do you go from there? Who's the next best edge rusher that you can count on? I really like Tyree Wilson, by the way. I think he's another one that, man, you watch his Big 12 tape, he was a game wrecker, and I don't think he's all the way there yet. So the upside pick, he's definitely one of them. He's kind of, in my opinion, this year's version of a Travon Walker.
Yeah, it is because Walker went number 1 last year overall. Now this guy might be in the 20s or 30s.
Right, and he's shot up that board. Kalijah Cansey's another one. You're not necessarily a position group, but we fall into these. We've got to compare him to somebody, and just because he played at Pitt, you want to say Aaron Donald, but he did have a freakish performance. I talked to Pat Narduzzi before the combine, and he was telling me Kalijah, his goal was to run the fastest time ever for a defensive lineman. That was before it happened. So definitely a guy that gets after it. He's one of those guys that comes to practice and works and plays with that, I hate saying chip on his shoulder, but definitely one of those guys.
Yeah, for sure here. Last thing here, we talk about a bunch of guys. There's one sleeper you feel like nobody's talking about yet. You feel like he's going to be a very good NFL player.
I mean, there's so many out there at the draft, right? I mean, we mentioned Bijan Robinson, another running back I really like, and I'm surprised he's not higher. I really like Zach Charbonnet. I liked his career. I know he played a little bit longer, but at UCLA, he did everything right. I mean, piled up numbers. He got in the end zone. He has great vision. He catches football. He can block. The value picks at running back, that's why Bijan's so tough to talk about between him and Gibbs, because you could probably wait and get a guy like Charbonnet. And as you know, if anybody that plays fantasy football, there's 3 or 4 rookies every year. I mean, we weren't talking about Dameon Pierce last year, and he won a lot of people some fantasy money last year.
Yeah, sure. One guy I'm watching here, I feel like we're going back to the quarterback well here, obviously, is I feel like Hendon Hooker was on his way to being a first-round pick before he tore his ACL. And, I mean, that and the age, you're going to be sort of turning off the teams. But, I feel like you put him in the right situation where he can develop and, doesn't have to start right away. You can bring him back off the injury. I feel like he's got a chance to be a starter in the league.
Oh, for sure. And doesn't make a lot of mistakes. There's some people that are going to try to make the Jalen Hurts comparison because, he runs a little bit. He comes from the SEC. He's going to fall a little bit like Jalen Hurts did. But, one thing he shares, he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He only threw 5 interceptions the last 2 years. And I know he played in a quarterback-friendly offense at Tennessee, but he still made the plays, and he elevated the program, and he's a little bit older. And that doesn't seem to be as much of a concern with NFL scouts now because we had the COVID year. You've had 6-year college players. That's why I think Stetson Bennett might actually get a shot to be a high-end backup, and a Max Duggan who played a lot of college football. Those guys, they're not going to be first-round starters or anything like that, but they definitely could get a look because of that experience.
Yeah, that's for sure, Bill. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, can people follow on social media, keep up with your college football coverage?
Yeah, I mean, we're at sportingnews.com. I'm Bill Bender92 on Twitter, and we'll have plenty of spring football and draft coverage over the next couple weeks.
You'll definitely be checking all that stuff out, Bill. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.